Welcome to the Chaim Investment Advisors podcast. I'm Chaim, and here with Pablo, and today we're going to be talking about the dark conspiracy to control the entire world by BlackRock and Vanguard.
It goes deep. It goes deep. I mean, like, the thing is, you would think that a conspiracy like this, wouldn't be known at the highest levels of government. But there's paperwork everywhere. I gotta let you know. It's all over. The paper trail is huge. So,
right. So we're going to be talking about BlackRock. Does it really control the entire world and every aspect of your financial life? Short answer, no.
Yeah. I mean, first of all,
no.
I'm going to give like a little shout out to all of the privately owned businesses and companies around the world. I feel like they often get left out of these conspiracies. People say it controls everything. It's like, well, you're missing out on what happens to be probably one of the largest parts of the market. In many places where there's no, public ownership. I mean, there are countries with militaries and tanks and all sorts of stuff who have no public trading, no functional, we should say. Like, they might have a facade of like public trading, but they have no functional publicly traded companies. They have no functional public markets. And oftentimes, if you look at like the companies that come from these countries, they're using other exchanges and other places to trade their public shares. So the truth is like, just if you could just think about things for a second analytically, we would know this can't be true because they can only own things. So like, is it public ownership? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's a little that right there is like that right there is what we call a clue.
Right. So that leaves most of the economy off the table, and the entire public sector. Which a lot to leave off the table.
But still, I gotta say, kind of like, I'm still concerned that there's still, it's a good chunk there, and I want to know if BlackRock owns the rest of that chunk. If you tell me, that like you're going to take 1/3 of my income, that does seem like a lot, and
it would be.
I think so. I can't think of another organization besides BlackRock that sometimes takes 1/3 of my income.
Okay, so we're talking about this because I have been sent a video by multiple people over the last number of months, and it's a viral video. It's by Sorelle Finance, and usually we don't talk directly about people, but we will in this case because it's a viral video. It's super popular. Millions of people have seen this, and lots of people have talked about it, and many people have asked me about it. And so I figured it is time to finally actually talk about this viral video because, I'm sure actually a lot of you right now have probably even seen it at this point.
Yep. I think they're you sent this to me last week, and you said, you checked out this video? And I said, I haven't seen this video. And the first 30 seconds, I'm like, well, this is just factually incorrect. Like, there's just what's being said is like it's factually not right. And I think that our complaints start with the factual incorrectness, and I think for the rest of the complaints, you'll see where it goes and why. Yeah. Why we're not super stoked that this is such a big video. I think it plays on some tropes. It plays on certain demographics like insecurities. It's a little bit Austrian, and both of us are associated a little bit Austrian economics. We've done some reading, kind of more than I have, but I like a little bit of libertarian philosophy also. But this video, it's just it's one of those videos you're dumber after you watched it. Like that's the truth. After you watch this, you're dumber than you were before.
It is definitely one of those where you're like, you're more confused at the end of it than at the beginning. And really, most of the comments, if you go watch the video, they demonstrate that.
So I think a good place to start, right? We've been talking about the video. We can have people in enough suspense. How about you give sort of a brief description of the claims in the video, and then we'll talk about why it's all pretty much wrong.
Exactly. So the main claim of the video is that BlackRock and Vanguard is tacked on at the end, and many people have also said the same of Vanguard owns every company that you can pretty much imagine. And how ownership is described is probably the biggest problem, because they say, okay, they own $9 trillion of investment assets. And that's where it's basically immediately starts to come off the rails, because BlackRock does not own it. Like, let's say I have funds in BlackRock personally. Now, when I invest my funds through a ETF, an index ETF that BlackRock happens to manage, they do not own my money. I own my money.
That brings up, like, I think that's a good point. If anyone out there right now is investing in mutual funds or ETFs, and they are taking your money and then not giving you shares in return, that actually is a crime. They are stealing it from you. And you have a lawsuit. Yeah, you're welcome to, like, you have a lot of resources. That's what I would say to get back your money. If they take your money and they don't give you shares in return, and they say they own the shares, that's a crime. So that's
that would be securities fraud. So it's a problem.
Exactly, a little bit of an issue. Yeah.
Right. So those $9 trillion of assets are invested in pretty much any publicly traded company you can imagine. Largely because BlackRock has index funds, and when you create an index of stocks or index of funds, international or otherwise, you gotta invest in the companies that comprise the index. That's how indexes work. If you create an index like Vanguard's all stock, total U.S. stock market index, well, guess what? You got to invest in most of that, if not all of it.
That's right. Well, and I think let's talk about that for a second, right? Like, this index fund, this passive investing, they offer a lot of different funds, and the reason they offer a lot of different funds, and, like, for those of you who've done financial planning with Chaim, you'll know this, right? Like, our major concerns when we're doing financial planning is, we're trying to assess risk, right? I mean, if risk wasn't a factor, we would all just want the most alpha, the most money that we could get. Like, why would I be even concerned with other stuff? But there is risk. Risk is a factor. We know, like, what the risk is and when we have risk tolerance, you know what I'm saying? And so the purpose of diversification, right? Now, oftentimes, diversification, you're trying to, like, mitigate risk, so you don't really know, like, which company is going to be the best oil company, but you think that oil is a good place to put your money. You're going to have a fund that compromises all oil companies, or at least as close to all oil companies as you can. No one would then say that you are somehow some sort of cabal who owns all oil companies. No, that would be ridiculous. Not only because you own so few shares of the oil companies, that first of all would make it ridiculous, but second of all, the entire intention of creating that fund was to own a little bit of every oil company, And so I think that's the first place that people get confused here, right? Like, BlackRock has a lot of different funds. They're offering a lot of different products to different financial advisors, different financial planners, and that is the intention, actually, for it to be indexed and passive.
And there's thousands of them. There are thousands of BlackRock funds.
Something for everything. That's the entire idea, right? And I think, like, we kind of talk about this index part. Maybe you could talk a little bit about why passive funds are reliable for financial planners like you, or financial advisors, or people who want to compose portfolios. So.
Right. So the whole reason that passive investing becomes so attractive is that the manager who's creating you're getting exposure to the company or the asset class or the investment at large, but you are not thinking that you have a great idea about how to step in from the outside as an activist investor and tell them what to do, tell them how to run their business. That is the fundamental difference between the passive manner of investing, is saying, like, look, Apple knows how to make the iPhone. I do not. I do not probably enhance Apple's core business by going in there and thinking I know, oh, well, you got to do this and that, and you'll improve, sales. I'm the next.
Yeah, you're not in the business of Apple. No, you're in the business of, like, and so that's good. Like, so we got, like, three initial claims. One of them is that BlackRock owns everything. Right. Two, that they control everything. Them. Yeah, exactly. Which is, like, that's another important piece. And the third thing, which they kind of type on the end, which is that, like, and Vanguard owns them, so they're the company behind the company. And okay, so we talked about why a company would own everything. First of all, that's obvious exaggeration. Owning a little bit of everything is a lot different than owning everything. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
You know, if I own a slice of the pizza that we both ordered together, that's not the same as owning the whole pizza. And people would be very upset if I took the rest of the pizza. So that claim right there, we know is wrong.
Right.
And we have talked about why, like, passive is important, because, like, when you say that, like, you're controlling something, right? That means activists. To us as investors, activists. So if you're a passive investor, you control nothing, and not only that, but your intention is to control nothing. Your idea is that, like, someone else is going to do all the work, and then you're going to collect the money, and that's good. And then after that, you're going to retire. That's, like, the whole purpose of doing this passive thing. So now I'm curious about these nefarious, because I get what you're saying about BlackRock, but these nefarious Vanguard people, we need to dive into this. I'm curious about these people.
Right. So then Vanguard, well, one of the things that commonly shows up also in the comment section of that video is, but we don't know who owns Vanguard. And Vanguard, back when they set up Vanguard, they said, well, John Bogle, who made, or Bogle, he said, I don't really want it to be like other finance corporations. I want the shareholders to be the owners, not just the shareholders of the fund, and the largesse gets sucked out to some meta structure that I am the captain of. He said, well, that's actually the problem. That's how you get such high expense fees. Creating this big overhead, somebody who's just trying to get all of the gravy to the top, that's actually how it becomes expensive and inefficient. His whole idea was, like, let's try to make the most efficient operations that you possibly could with this kind of a finance corporation.
Okay, but kind of who really owns me? I'm being very vague. I just want to make sure.
I own Vanguard.
Okay, there we go. Now we get to the truth.
Right. So, like, if you own a Vanguard fund, you are the shareholder of the Vanguard fund. Literally, like, you are actually. That's what it means to be a shareholder.
So we just got to find these 10 shareholders of Vanguard and we're good. Right? It just seems pretty easy. Oh, by the way, like, I'm curious because I read a comment that said that they didn't disclose who owned these shares. And it's strange because sometimes when I'm just browsing on Yahoo, you know me, I just like sit on Yahoo sometimes in the finance section. I see exactly who owns shares and what they're doing. And I'm also curious, like, it seems like there might be some regulatory body that might impose laws to tell people who own shares, especially if they have some sort of controlling interest. Am I wrong there, or is that like...
There's even a form for it, and it's called 13F. And you got to file it if you're a major shareholder making a change of ownership. You got to do it, and that's how we even know in the first place. Like you pointed out, that's actually how we would know what she's saying is true, that BlackRock owns this.
Exactly. How would you know?
Precisely know. Who is the major shareholders? The people who don't got to file a 13F are, like, not people who could control Vanguard. I don't file a 13F, but I also, can't call any company I invest in and be like, have about 0.0001% of your capital floating. I've got some things to say to you.
I got things I want done. Listen here. Okay, so nobody knows that I am the owner of a number of these companies, but also nobody would care to know that because I don't register on the scale of any influence whatsoever. Listen, if there were enough of you, like if there were, say, millions of you guys could conspire to do something with it, like, is that not true? If I had like 20 or 30 million of you could conspire to do something with Vanguard. So we're not, like, out of the weeds yet, you know what I'm saying? There's still a possibility. Yeah. And then the other thing you're telling me is the SEC is just in on it. I get it. Okay. But I think, like, the point you made is, like, you don't even register. So in order for, like, a group large enough to register, that in itself wouldn't be a conspiracy. That would just be people, everyday people making decisions. In fact, that would be, like, the most democratic way that you could direct something in a company. So I think that, like, that is kind of an interesting point. And then the part like we talked about, if you own some super controlling interest, this is true even if you're a company that owns a controlling interest in another company, you're required to put that in like your investment or your investment statements, right? Like there's like different filings, whether it's quarterly or yearly, et cetera. And you have to explain that, like, hey, this is what I own, this is what this person owns. So you go ahead.
It's true. And also a passive, diversified. So if you want to use the term passive diversified fund, this is a regulated term for one thing. It goes all the way back to the 1930s regulation on this. You can't be a majority stakeholder. You cannot. It's actually, you cannot be a passive diverse fund and be out there being the majority stakeholder of a bunch of companies. It's actually not something you could do. You're not allowed to do it. And the size of asset base you would need would be so enormous, because you also can't run a diversified fund and have more than 5% of that fund invested in any one company. So we're talking like staggering amounts of money would be required to accomplish this.
let's point out something else. It literally there's regulatory there's rules and schemes around how much you can own in order to be like this fund that's diversified. Yes. So not only would it be illegal for your fund just to be like 80% invested in one thing, you know what I'm saying? Like the regulatory, but you were encouraged to own a wide spread of funds, right? So I think this is like kind of like just goes to some of like the financial ignorance, but the financial ignorance, you know, as hard as it is to overcome, I could kind of overcome, you know. I think where my problem starts, right, and this is my problem here, is that like people throw around these sort of terms like, doesn't the ADL own Vanguard? And it's like, first of all, I don't know what that means, because I think that they're a nonprofit. Perhaps their 401k does have some Vanguard shares, but doesn't a lot of other groups have some Vanguard shares? As a statement, that means nothing. You know what I'm saying? If you think that owning Vanguard is the litmus test for being in a conspiracy, well, I have news for you. Your grandma and your grandpa are also in this conspiracy.
Yeah,
your teachers are in this conspiracy.
You know is in it.
Yeah, the largest union in like the United States, you know, in this conspiracy. You know what I'm saying? The guy down at 7-Eleven probably also in this conspiracy. He's got a 401k somewhere. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so
it's so large that it's no longer a conspiracy. It's
exactly. I mean,
it's just the democratic process.
At this point, like, if everyone's on a conspiracy except for you, I mean, this is not the podcast for you. Actually, you need it.
Yeah, it's actually YouTube probably isn't even the website anymore for that kind of content.
Probably not really a place you need to be. So I do think like, okay, so like that's kind of like a big thing, right? Like a lot of like of these shares are owned by institutions, right? And they're owned by like, for instance, like I own shares for like my 401k, right? That's like Vanguard. One of the most famous things they're famous for is like target funds. These are target funds for retirement. These are like saying like, hey, if you either aren't sure like how to compose your portfolio for your retirement date, or you don't feel like you have a reliable narrator in the finance industry, or all sorts of things, or you're just like, hey, I don't want to think that much about it, you can choose these target funds. And they say like, these are like going to be pretty good. These are pretty good, well-composed funds that you can choose. These are funds that are like Vanguard's. I mean, almost every person I ever talked to at a 401k like was offered Vanguard. Why? Because they're cheap, and these target funds are well composed, and they're well composed because they're index funds. So all of the things that this video would have you believe are conspiratorial are in fact the features of these funds. These are not bugs. These are the features of these funds.
Yes.
That they are owned by lots of people and diversified so that you can retire. That's the conspiracy here, is that people want you to be able to retire. That's what I would say.
Right. And yeah, so it is a little difficult to draw a line from this amount of stakes Vanguard or BlackRock has in these companies to any kind of control in the video. You go watch the video. You know, one of the claims she makes is about Vox.com. And Vox.com, you know, if you follow us on Instagram, sometimes I say pro and con things about this or that. You know, I have,
They got good graphics. Someone to let you know right there. I like their.
Yeah, I think even last week I had said something about a good Vox article. But Vox, you know, the claim in the video is that Vox.com did an article debunking a conspiracy theory that BlackRock was trying to own the U.S. housing market. And it's a good article. The article that she is attacking actually is really well researched. It actually makes some pretty compelling points that
I heard they own like thousands and thousands of apartments. So again, like, you know, I'm a little on edge here. Like thousands of apartments. Please, you're gonna have to do more to alleviate my fear. How do I know that they're not? Like, it begins with thousands, and next thing you know, it's 10,000 or something. I don't actually know how many apartments there are in the United States of America. Yeah, that's right.
It is wild that people are that concerned about
we talked about like
a 5-figure amount of apartments. It's not actually.
We talked about a similar thing because, like, we were talking about like I often heard about like this same complaint against Bill Gates. And for those of you like who don't really, we talk a lot about finance here, not much about like politics, But I want you to know, I'm not like some super Bill Gates fan or Elon Musk fan or anything. I don't spend much of my time even thinking about these people. I'm like busy working. They're billionaires, so I'm trying to get closer to that point. But my point is, and this specific thing, is that like when we talk about someone, they're buying up all this stuff, you should ask yourself, what's the ratio that they own compared to everything else? It comes back to that pizza slice thing. If you own one slice of pizza, you know what I'm saying? And like, I don't know, like your pizza is like 60 slices, you know what I'm saying? We can hardly say that you were some sort of pizza cartel. You know what I'm saying? Like, you own 1/60th of the pizza. Okay, And the same with like these situations. Like, how much apartments does BlackRock own? And again, this is their job. Their job is, and this is something like those of you who listen to other podcasts might know, but this happens all the time, right? Like even like Chaim and I talk about this. Some new product or some new idea, it can be a strategy or it can be a new product or a new, like, I wouldn't say like there's a lot of new asset classes, but it could be like some new way to look at an asset class. When this happens, these people rush out to build a passive fund around that strategy or that asset class and that new strategy for that asset class. Because if they don't, someone else will, and their job is to sell it for as cheap as possible. This is literally how those markets work.
Right. Yeah, and that's their entire job. And if 5-figure number of apartments compared to $9 trillion of assets under management is not even approaching a fraction of a percent of what BlackRock's access. And when you think about it, who do you know that hires BlackRock to go out and buy apartments? Really, very few. This is a service mostly that they pitch to pension funds. I mean, it's usually a diversifier for pension funds who want alternative asset exposure and don't have to worry about the tax efficiency of this kind of investment for their purposes. And so it's a tiny piece of the BlackRock whole. Which mostly is just passively investing in companies that are publicly traded. But anyway, the article says, okay, the article kind of defended, or the video says the article defended BlackRock and implies that BlackRock is a passive, very small owner in the publicly traded media company that owns Fox, which is Comcast. A small, like 3% owner through all of their funds put together of this company. And that somehow you could draw a line from this article defending BlackRock to their, what BlackRock is like calling up Comcast, being like, "Oh, you better get your guys, having our back out there and your sub properties blog needs to defend us." It's just it really stretches credulity for anybody. It should.
Well, and I think that
doubt those claims.
this underlying conspiracy. Let's start with like the conspiracy of BlackRock owning apartments. So the first thing that people often understand is like when you have these like sort of large index funds and they own something, what they're trying to do is make returns off that industry or that sector with the least amount of effort possible. It is a lot more effort to go around building up conspiracies about who can live where and how we're going to raise people out of like, we're going to make it so that it's impossible for them to live here unless like they make this many, like that. All of that is a lot of work. You know what I'm saying? And that's the same thing. One second. It's the same thing though. That's the same thing for like, you know, someone calling up Vox and being like, oh, we got a situation here. All of that is a lot of work. And the entire like the business strategy is to not put in much work, to build a fund and then sell the product, and then that's it. But there's a larger problem with this, which is that the amount of scrutiny, whether it's public backlash or just regulatory scrutiny that you face when you do these things is like super high. That's why when you go to like Business Insider and you go to like the Washington Post, you know what I'm saying? They will always disclose when they talk about Jeff Bezos. They'll always disclose when they talk about Amazon, you know? And even then, when they say something that's like even slightly, you know what I'm saying? You're going to get like backlash. Just even slightly, oh, like, well, you can't even like talk well on those people. So like, of course, media is like trying to form people's opinions, etc. You know what I'm saying? But the very like naive and manipulative way that it's presented in this video, it makes no sense. It's not sophisticated or savvy, and it likely is to cost them more money than anything. You know, and most of all, we're talking about someone who's such a small owner in like in the real estate like class that it makes no sense to them anyway. Like it's not really where this is not where they're making their money. You know, this is like
right. Yeah, this is not even like the bread and butter at BlackRock. This is not even like an emerging place that they're, you know, getting way into. This is a pretty small, you know, hedge strategy that really is offered for a niche. It's a service for a niche consumer, and that's the other thing that is not talked about. Is like, well, why is it that you know, a pension fund might hire BlackRock? Is it because the pension fund is, you know, secretly, you know, controlled, you know, through mind tricks or something by BlackRock? No, it's because they actually make a pitch. So that's what every investment process involves: somebody coming saying, here's a product, here's a concept, here's a pitch, here's how much it costs. And BlackRock wins a lot of those. As somebody who's done hundreds of processes, BlackRock tends to win a lot of them because it does a very good job, and it actually is more transparent. Like, this is one of the wild things about the conspiracy theory. Is one of the reasons I actually like working with BlackRock pretty often is that they actually are way more transparent than the competition. That sometimes you're like dragging details out of people who don't know them. You know, who are like, I don't really know. This is not a thing anybody's ever asked. Well, BlackRock tends to actually have huge amounts of documentation on their processes. And BlackRock is, if you manage $9 trillion of assets, you are a top-down, process-driven, organized operation. You're not out there ad hoc making calls to people saying, "Oh yeah, we gotta kill this story." It boggles the mind. Imagine
it reminds me like
the company.
It reminds me of like this thing I like to call like some kind of like some conspiracy of truth. I think like one time I was trying to like show this person like one of those like math tricks or whatever that you do, and like the number comes out like this, and they're like really mind blown. I'm like, yeah, but it's math. You see, like it's not a conspiracy because this is the way it's been presented, and like this is what's going to happen. And this is the same thing in the sense that like this is the conspiracy or truth of the market. It's like, well, they're the largest people in this market, and it's like, yes, because they're good at their jobs. That's how you win business, like, right? Like, I mean, the conspiracy really would be if they were terrible at their jobs and yet somehow had a bunch of business. That would be a concern. We'd be like, how are they getting so much business? They're not very good at their jobs, you know. And I think that's like part of the issue here is that like people like these sort of giant conspiracies, and me, I'm like very naive, you know. When Chaim sent me this like video, I watched like the first 30 seconds. I was like, well, this is trash, you know. That was like my first reaction. No offense against Lee. I watched some of their videos, and they're not bad. They're like they're I can see what her niche is, you know. I can see like where she's trying to hit. But some people shouldn't talk about macroeconomics or finance because, especially because of the certain demographics and the sort of like subtle undertones. And so we kind of like asked you like to look at the comments, and that's where I was like, I was just like, what are these comments? There were just a lot of comments, I think, that had a specific tone. And I think that like maybe you could talk about that a little bit. When people start talking about, when people are talking about these sort of conspiracies and financial, and this is again why I'm naive. So I'm talking about financial conspiracies. Like my mind doesn't go to like Rothschild or like any sort of like Zionist thing, because I'm just like financial conspiracy. Like I mean, like companies do conspire to make money. I don't like really know what they're talking about. You know what I'm saying? Right. So it's not a very that statement lacks a lot of clarity. But also because anyone who's researched the history of finance knows that people holding wealth over long periods of time is just not really a thing. Like even when people talk about these like, you know, these monarchs or aristocracies, these people are not nearly as wealthy as the people like 3 or 4 generations. Like they're holding on to the idea of wealth,
right,
and hoping that carries them through. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that. Because I did find that like on top of like finding out the video, just like I just thought it was like straight trash. This is like sort of like the icing on the cake where I was like, well, and it also just generated this sort of negative movement, which I didn't really care for. So.
Well, yeah, it was you know, first time I watched the video. Within probably 2 minutes, I said, you know what, I'm gonna listen to the video, but I know what the comments are. I know because this is now. I'm not just going to say baselessly, oh, this is a massive dog whistle. You kind of know if something is a dog whistle, if people are standing in the field whistling black like crazy. Like you got, you know, 50 guys going, woo, dog whistling back. Okay. Yeah, it was. Whether you wanted it to be or not, it absolutely was received that way.
Well, and the interactions with dog whistles, right? I mean, you look through the comments and like the creator is like interacting with these people, and and it's not like hard. I mean, to be honest, like when someone first of all, bringing up the Rothschild again, it's one of these things. It's just like when you talk about where the wealth and power is. There's a reason that the United States of America has like the only like blue water navy in the world, the most like no matter where you think things are going. If you wanted to look at like the superpower, and people can feel however they want to feel about that. The United States of America is the superpower. You look at the wealthiest people in America, there is not a Rothschild conspiracy. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, I mean, if I was a Rothschild, I'd be hoping that I'd even have more power than I'm like, well, what's going on here, guys? You know what I'm saying? It makes zero sense. Of course, there's tons of exactly. Tons of European aristocracies would love to be like having way more control over American ideas and assets, et cetera, than they do. The fact is that America built itself up because people don't have that. Because if you don't produce and you don't show up and you're like, you know, you take a great example is Elon Musk. I remember looking at his like his debt and bondholders, you know, they issue a call on him, right? And then thinking like, this guy's not going to make it. And then he made it, whether it's through sheer will and charisma, whatever it is, no one cared once he made it. Once he started making it, that was that. And that's how America, like, you know, that's how the capitalism works in America, how the markets work. Not unlike you were my friend on what you did for me today. I mean, like, whether you think it's ruthless or whatever, that is how it works. So the idea that, like, there's some sort of conspiracy here, and it's centered around, like, really, like, to me, seems like, and I didn't catch on at first, but it really seems like anti-Semitism. And the reason that it made sense later, because we talk about the demographics, and this is one of the things, again, I think Chaim and I are familiar with, there can be, ironically, some anti-Semitism in like Austrian economics. When I say like ironically, because Austrian economics closely associated with libertarianism, and there's just a lot of Jewish thinkers across the board that like across the sector. So it's like it's a weird thing to like see. You're just like, well, you know, I mean, it's strange. That's what I would say, to say the least.
It's super ironic because one of the guys, probably the titan of Austrian economics, Mises himself. Ludwig von Mises was Jewish, and also not only was Jewish, but actually spent some of the space in his economics books railing against anti-Semitism. So he wasn't like, you know, a self-loathing, you know, sad person. He actually was like, no, this is the absolutely wrong thing to start interjecting into discourse, and so that's the irony. And
that's true also for libertarianism. One of like titans of libertarianism, also you know, Jewish persons. I think that the problem there. Well, you know, you might have something to say about it. I think that the problem there is just some of the people who keyed in on like these type of views and where they like coalesce. Right. We have people who are. I don't be honest. I think like, you know, at the time we were dealing with a different America, and so they were probably just like prejudiced across the board. But I also think they were just concerned about people in other countries trying to control situations, and that has evolved into what is just clearly a delusional idea
Right.
There is some sort of radical cabal of Zionists somewhere.
Right. So let's read a couple of them. So one of the ones, the first one, I have there's dozens of them, but the first one I have here is, how about Rothschild?
Yeah.
And to your point about the decline of wealthy families over time, the current, young dude in the Rothschild family, David the Rothschild, what he spends his time doing, you can follow him on Instagram, a good follow, actually. Because he's cool. I actually think he's kind of rad. He does a whole Save the Whales thing, and he goes around in boats. He's an ecologist, okay? He's not out there making calls to Vox Media. He's not out there.
Well, and I think that this is the key thing is if you look at those people who are wealthy or they came from wealth, I mean they are a leg up, but most of the time if you're not out there building wealth again, you're just slowly regressing to the mean. There's nothing wrong with that. You're just spending money and enjoying your life, and you're going back to, because that's not your passion. You're not someone who wants to work 20 hours a day to build wealth. It's just not something that's in everyone. I don't even think that I mean, people will say it's genetic, but I believe the variation in inheritability is probably much wider. You know what I'm saying? It's not something that if there was one line of people who that happened with, we would already clearly see that. It's just something that pops up sometimes and it doesn't pop up. Just sometimes you got a kid and he's I like being outdoors, and sometimes I don't want to go outdoors. You know what I'm saying? That's just the way it is. Sometimes you have someone, they want to work 20 hours and build something, and sometimes none of their kids do, and none of them care at all about it. They just want to be I want to enjoy my life and spend my money, and that means that money is going back out into the economy. This is true for any wealthy situation, which is one of the reasons that it always confounds me when people talk about people with massive amounts of wealth. And I'm look, they're either investing it, which is good for you because then they're out there creating jobs and building business and putting their capital to work, or they're failing, or they're spending it, which is also good for you because that means they're out there creating jobs and they're spending capital. I mean, this is something we may talk about later because we did have a little conversation about this before the podcast, but the point of inflation, which we kind of talked about last time, is that people don't hoard wealth, right? So anyway, that's off topic. We did have a thing on inflation. If you missed that, you can watch it. It was last week. So
actually people don't hoard wealth because there's an entire massive, not conspiracy, but policy agenda that is actually agreed on by pretty much everybody in society, that we should have mechanisms to make it so people don't hoard wealth forever and ever and ever. And then the next comment was from Nat Genesis. Rothschild owns nearly 90% of the world's wealth. And that's,
once again, he knows a lot more about world finance than I do. I think he has better connections. I'm concerned about which milk stands does he own? Does he own banana stands, horchata stands? I guess maybe in Cuba, is he running the taxi service? They must own that taxi service, right? I mean, I have to say they should up their rates. I don't think those taxi drivers are making enough down there. This is just it was such an absurd thing to say, right? It's 90%. It's
wild to me because I think about everybody that I know and everybody that works with us, and so if we put 90% on top of that, what is that number? If all of this visible stuff is only 10%, that's like the meme of you finally use 100% of your brain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I got. Well, the other thing, I'm gonna be honest, and this is just my own technique from analysis and looking at a lot of numbers and doing a lot of different just working in different space where you do a lot of analytic work. Anytime someone gives you a nice round number, probably not true. 90, not 91.1, just 90. And you ask for let's see the work on that. Well, no, it's 90. No, it's not out of 10. You know what I'm saying? That's just numbers. Just if you think about all the real numbers you could have, odd that it landed on that one.
Right. That's it is pretty convenient. 90.
Some would call that a conspiracy.
But then we also got from Neil Anthony, supposedly George Soros is a major stockholder at BlackRock, which, interestingly enough, I think that is not true because George Soros actually buys his own stuff, man. That's why he's where he is he's not out there hiring Larry Fink to do the investing for him. That's George Soros is the investor.
Well, this brings up a good point, which we kind of like talked about, but just in case it wasn't articulate for everyone to understand. The reason that you own Vanguard shares, the reason that you own BlackRock shares, is you yourself are not sophisticated enough to make the decisions about what you should own, right? Because like you don't understand the level of risk and et cetera. So you don't since you don't have like the financial education, you say, hey, I'm going to invest in these shares. And then that person is going to like get the reward of having someone else do like some passive investing. This is the reason that like after that, you go to Chaim, and then Chaim puts together a portfolio because he then understands some level of risk about the market and where your returns want to be. So the whole point of these things is to alleviate people of the burden of not understanding the financial markets. That is not something that George Soros is suffering from. He doesn't need to pay BlackRock some sort of service fee to do this. He can do whatever he wants to do because he has lots of money. And even if he missed a couple times, he has enough money that he can recover and hit a couple times. And he, to be honest, is interested in active investing most of the time. He's interested in taking active positions, creating a thesis, and then winning very big after his thesis is correct. You do not win very big with index funds.
Yeah, you don't become that wealthy.
Yeah.
As much as I like index funds, this is not to bash them, but that's not how you become.
It's to build and preserve wealth rather than risk losing it. So that's the purpose of it.
What most people should do.
And it's also the reason that, like, when you have, I'm sure, like, those of you who are clients, so you have a conversation with Chaim, and you like sits down and he goes through all these questions. He's trying to figure out, like, actually what level of risk you do want to take and when you want to be able to have a certain amount of money. And then he's trying to ensure that you get there. That is the purpose that people don't understand. Oftentimes, I played a little bit of poker and I used to talk to a lot of gamblers. A lot of the big problems are people saying, well, it's only a 1% chance. It's only a 1% chance I'm going to fail. And the one thing I don't think that people often understand about statistics or probabilities, et cetera, is that, like, if you take a 1% chance and then you times it by, like, 30 or 40, now there's a really big chance that one of those 1% chances are going to come true. 1% by itself sounds great, you know what I'm saying? 1% over iteration, that does not really sound that great. You know what I'm saying? Now it's starting to look dark. And you imagine that, you're building a portfolio of time to like build success in your future. You really don't want to find out that there's a 30% chance now because you went over 1% over 1% over 1% that you're going to fail. That's not something anyone's interested in, which is the reason that we have these passive funds, right? The reason that we have these passive funds is to eliminate those we need to like 0.00001%. And we need it to be like, the risks to be so associated with other risks that, like, if you're failing relatively, you're not failing.
Right. Yeah. You wouldn't limit it to, like, Mars attack scenario.
Exactly. By the way, that's a conspiracy worth being concerned about. If Mars attacks, but I'm going to tell you right now, you're not going to care what your BlackRock fund's doing if Mars attacks. You're going to have a whole other set of issues on your hands. Yeah.
That's true. I wonder if BlackRock has an interest.
They probably have a controlling interest in Mars.
A little green bit as well.
I bet ownership can be traced to Rothschild. And what I find great about this is because we go over this in the podcast just now, you actually can find out large controlling interests. So instead of just being lazy and naming out some random person, which he probably doesn't know anybody who's a Rothschild or hasn't been anybody or done any actual research. I mean, most conspiracies that are actually real are not that hard to verify because they're not. No. It's just hard to keep a conspiracy. You can just go look at facts and you can be like, oh, okay, I can see that this is true, We won't mention there's like plenty of things in history we know that there's been conspiracies, and we've been like, you can't even get 10 years out of the conspiracy before someone's talking to people. And you see a lot of people dying left and right, and you're like, well, that's probably something there. A lot of people dying left and right. Here's the thing with this conspiracy that gets me, is that it's just basically a Dungeons and Dungeons fantasy about like some sort of controlling cabal. That's all it is. It's just a thing that like keep. You don't really have anything going on, so it must be, as this guy says, it's down to King Rabbi, which I don't know. Okay, you're more of an expert here than I am, but I don't know what a King Rabbi is.
Wait,
so
I'm
gonna leave that one. I'm leave that one to you. I'm like,
that one really was like, what? So the King Rabbi one was interesting. There's a number of religious themed ones.
Is that a thing though?
Wait.
King Rabbi?
No.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
No, there's sadly no King Rabbi.
It's like
King David was, probably as close as we got, but that was a while ago.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, they spelled David wrong. That's all I can say.
But then we got Mickey Flockster, who says, just by coincidence, the company happens to be owned by ethnic Star of David ×6. Great people, our best friends.
Star of David ×6?
Yeah, 6 Star of David emojis.
I guess.
Which is, I think we know what's being implied there. And so we got a lot of these. Who owns BlackRock? The CEO is Lawrence Fink. The president is Robert Capito. What do they all have in common? The sons of the same people that we tried to bring down in World War II. Well, concerned about the weed.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll be a little lost on that one, but they're back at it this time.
Check out that IP and find out if that's Buenos Aires. I think they would.
Right. That's a little suspect.
Well, the thing is, like, here's one. It's like the money power. Which that's just first of all, it isn't a dumb phrase. The money power. I don't know. Okay. Anyway, that rules the world today is centered in the hands. And first, I have another problem. These people are too verbose. I could have made this. Wait, the money power that rules the world today is centered in the hands of individuals of particular race and creed. Like I could have been like it's Jews, and then that's like two words, and it's way more efficient. And I just feel like this guy just like it's not like no one knew what he was trying to say. That's like the problem, right? It's just like very cowardly. It's like, well, I'm not being anti-Semitic. I'm just, I don't know, I'm saying who it is, but I think we all know. It's like, that's really what that says. But the other problem I have is like, and I had this conversation with someone else about race, is that people don't actually, like, people go in like on these weird like human biodiversity things, etc. And they don't actually understand how genetics or race works or anything like that. They have no clue. They have zero clue. I have talked to so many people that I don't even bother talking about it. If people come to me and start talking about like some sort of like racist biology, I don't even like take offense. I'm just like, okay, that's cool. But that's like, that makes no sense. You know what I'm saying? Like for one, like how many genes are like, I'm that white gene, so I'll make sure I hang out with the white genes. Like that's just not how genes work. You know what I'm saying? I don't know like what that means. Like so. And then the whole race and creed is just like, I just think the whole thing is just ridiculous. But I really think that beyond the fact that it's just like super prejudiced, it's not even close to correct. It's not even something that could be feasible. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like if you were like, that guy Elon Musk who owns Twitter. He's in that would be dumb, but closer to a conspiracy because you'd be like, oh, that guy owns Twitter and like he is Elon Musk, so like there might be something there, but like that's like it could be functional. This thing is something you could just look at, and it's not functionally correct. Like the conspiracy is that there's no conspiracy, and that these people believe there's a conspiracy, and like we said, unfortunately, like in Austrian economics and libertarianism, sometimes there's like this. I think it's funny for two reasons. Like one, because they're often reductionist. They're like, oh, you should have gold and everything else. But like,
which he also does in a whole other video on the interest rate scam, which I'm afraid,
we might have to do one on that also.
Part 2. Let us know if you want part 2.
Super annoying. But the real thing that I was like, if you're a reduction and you're just very super practical, you know what I'm saying, and you're telling me. And this is like something I always say to anybody for anything, like for any time they're like making these sort of swathing like prejudice statements that like there's some group and they're doing way better than you and nothing you do can stop it. Then shouldn't your conclusion be like, nah, I'm just out of this game. I'm just not going to be any good. I'm trying for hundreds of years and it's just not working out. You know what I'm saying? So just like by their own logic, I'm just like, so you're telling me these people are too good. They're too good and you can't. What do you want me to do? Even in your own conspiracy, you're losing here, buddy.
It is really, the logic, it falls apart quickly. But then I saw this one, Rambach, of course, what you, the video maker, understandably did not mention is BlackRock is a Jewish company, provided they own the world's media. Now, this is where I start to have a problem with the video. Look, in the video, she says, BlackRock basically owns the media in a very direct way. Now, this person took the fact that Larry Fink is Jewish, the CEO, and said, see, the old thing that we used to say for the last many centuries, that, Jews secretly run the media, it's true still, and they're using the new BlackRock thing, and, yada, yada, the same old thing. And that's the problem with these kinds of dog whistles. If you're out there saying the shadowy cabal of guys named Fink own the media, this is what you get. This is the audience that you get. Also, you get a bunch of people who've never heard this stuff before. You get eyeballs on it. It's like, what? Like, this is a wild idea, and you get people going down the rabbit holes. That's how we are where we are now. With the
well, I want to
culture.
I want to do once again. I'm gonna do my little sort of Cheshire cat thing. I'm gonna ask you some questions and things that I think are a little ridiculous, but you can tell me. So, the first thing that I have to say, and I know that like in the Jewish religion, there are like a lot of I don't know a lot, but there are like principles about how you talk about how good a Jewish person is a Jew, and like whether that's anyone's place to say. But I do want to talk about one particular thing. Is it not true that most of the people they point to are some of the least religious Jewish people? Like,
right.
They really are. And like, I find this to be out because some of the most religious Jewish people that I've seen in the media are not people who have millions of dollars.
Right.
So I just feel like even the accusation itself of Zionism, the people that I would consider like to be very, very strong Zionists, are not people who are even really thinking about what I'm doing or what I'm watching in the media. I don't think that they care at all. I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Well, that's one of those things where you get to the question of, okay, well, like, why do so many Jewish guys end up in like in Hollywood and in finance? And guess what? People went to LA and they went to New York, and their parents said you got to get a good job, and well, it happens to be this is America, and we love movies and we love money. And so people said, well, I'm an urban city dweller, and I can go get my foot in the door on Wall Street. That's what my great grandfather did, and he showed up in New York penniless, left everything. This is my step great grandfather I'm talking about now, Irwin. He showed up and said, well, what do? You're in New York, you're broke, you need to do something, something about money. Well, you work on Wall Street. That's what he did. So, guess what? That's like what a lot of people in the family do, myself included now. That's how this ends up happening. Is if it's actually disconnected from the old religious tropes of, a bunch of rabbis are doing witchy stuff.
So you're trying to tell me that the most fundamentalist Zionist Jewish people aren't secretly sending you guys out to study and investing in media? I don't know. I'm gonna have to mull that over. I'm gonna think about it a little bit. I want to make sure that, but because like in all of my experiences, every time I see someone who's like intensely, I don't like judge like how intensely religious person is, but I think that we also understand what I'm saying. So not to like step on anyone's toes. But when I see those people who are like very devoted to religion, oftentimes I see they spend a lot of time praying. They're not. That's what they do. I don't see them doing any sort of conspiracies. I certainly don't see them hanging out with in banks and smoky mirrors and etc. So
that's one of the mechanisms that's always confused me with the conspiracy theories. Is they'll be like, they'll roll the religion in and be like, oh, it's a bunch of rabbi guys, but we're like, to your point, a lot of these guys haven't seen a shul since their bar mitzvah, if ever.
Okay.
And so that's real. That is super real. That okay, we know. Okay, so maybe the religious thing is pretty weak link between a lot of these people, but we got to find one, and we'll say like race is somehow involved, and who knows what that even means. So like, where are these people getting together and doing their thing? What's the real apparatus? Because the apparatus never seems to exist when you start poking at like
Yeah.
where is this thing?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, not there.
So I got another question. And again, this is just my observation. I'm curious. What I've noticed is some of the strongest critics of Israel were people I knew that were Jewish, or organizations that were had a lot of Jewish people in them.
Right.
And then sort of like the response I often hear is that's because they're selling all sides. Pablo.
Right. That's one of the oldest. And actually, that's the oldest story about Rothschild too. So that's purported. It's a myth. He didn't actually make his fortune by gambling on the outcomes of
Right.
the Battle of Waterloo.
Right.
It's just a freaky mythology. It's not real. He actually was pretty wealthy before that and after.
And it's unfalsifiable, if I understand. Like, if your theory is that, like, no matter what evidence I present, that's just another side that's being sold. There's no way to like say that it's like not true. So I mean,
right.
People will believe what they want to believe, but like if you come to me and you talk to me and you present something that's unfalsifiable, I probably am not going to have much faith that anything you're saying is accurate or rooted in truth.
Right, and a lot of times it's like people have never really listened to, like, hey, where are these opinions coming from? And there's a lot of, if you just listen to what an anti-Zionist Jewish person might have to say, a lot of times it's rooted in the same stuff that the people who are super Zionist happen to say, and that's actually the real root of what Jewish culture is that in our tradition, it's actually totally not only fine, but required that we disagree, basically, that we have our perspectives are important and nobody's, one step closer to the big dude. Except Moses got pretty close, but that was a long time ago.
I definitely think it's just like a strong point that like a lot of the people I see that are super critical of Israel were themselves people who are Jewish or identify as coming from like Jewish heritage, and so I just think that like it's kind of like a little bit ridiculous statement when he talks about like I think one guy said like you can't criticize Israel or NATO, and that brings up kind of like the latter half of that point, which is that I don't know if this guy's been to other countries, but in America, despite what everyone thinks, you're one of the least racist places on the planet, including anti-Semitism and and like just one of the most, for as much like as you see in the media, like our level of racism does not even register if you go to other countries, not even like other countries like in like
right.
Asia or like Africa, or like I mean like just going to places in Europe where like the idea of embracing everyone under like some certain tenets like the Constitution and like other American values is not really something that like people have in other countries. So I think it's funny when people like try to present this idea without understanding that like America is just generally not a very prejudiced place, and kind of throw in NATO there. I don't know like why NATO actually would care. I don't know if that guy knows the purpose of NATO.
NATO, it gets rolled in a bunch of these, as does Zionism. Zionism, actually one of the comments that I had here was just Zionism. That's the comment. From Rita. So that's there's a lot of implications that somehow BlackRock is like the pillar of Zionism or something, and in reality, not the case. BlackRock is a kind of, you could think of how BlackRock really functions. It is kind of a confederation, that you can actually go read the opinions of different fund managers within the BlackRock fund family. Now, the majority, a huge slice, maybe not quite yet a majority yet, but a massive slice of BlackRock's assets are passively owned. So who cares about what the manager thinks? It's
exactly.
Some ETF that's the small cap growth ETF. Okay, the manager, we don't care about the guy's opinion probably because he's not even the manager. But when there are active managers in the BlackRock cinematic universe, you can actually hear precisely their opinions, and they actually don't agree. That's why they have different theses. They have different concepts. The fixed income managers sometimes, if you're on a call with BlackRock that has multi-asset managers, they're bringing completely different perspectives than that, just arguing with the guys who are the equity managers. So yeah, there isn't an actual uniform agenda at BlackRock, and that's how it has done so well. Like that is actually back to that trope of like, well, how did we get here? How did BlackRock win? Well, precisely because it's not Larry Fink, man on the mountain, screaming down orders to a bunch of lackeys. It's actually a pretty dynamic company with an immense number of offerings and views and strategies represented under this purported umbrella. Like it is a corporation. Each fund has some slice that goes up to the largesse of BlackRock in the administrative part, but really they are independent funds. Each fund that operates at BlackRock. So yeah, the whole the accusations of one specific agenda being pushed. It really, knowing BlackRock very well is not something that is credible to me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think sort of final thing that I'd like to add in terms of conspiracy theories, I think that a lot of people do not understand how free markets work. I used to say free markets because oftentimes people find this word capitalist loaded. I think that when people say capitalist, they just think that whatever system they're under is capitalist, and not necessarily be accurate. You and I talked earlier this week about regulatory capture, which is a great topic. We should probably do a podcast on at some point. But markets work by everyone sort of getting what they need out of the market. That's how markets clear. Markets are voluntary transactions, right? And so if you come to tell me that you have been participating in some market, but you feel you've been conspired against, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's like, to what extent have you really been conspired against? For example, just to give a great example, sometimes people might say I could have been conspired against if these people all engaged in price fixing. I think that's a great example, just from the economic standpoint, that I'd like to challenge the idea that price fixing could even be a conspiracy. Because the fact is sure, you might have got less of a price if they all didn't get together and decide this is the price. But the bottom line is you were like, this is worth it. And that's the part that clears the market. Right. And had you not thought it was worth it, there would have been no market to clear. Nothing would have happened. No transaction would have gone down. So even that can't really be that much of a conspiracy, right? I mean, we do have reasons for liquidity, et cetera, that we prefer not to have price gouging. But it's very hard to have serious conspiracies or price fixing. It's very hard to have serious conspiracies though in markets. It's just not something that you can really do. I remember once this person told me, "Oh, these people are terrible. They're taking water down to where the tornado is, and they're selling it for twice the price." And I'm like, "But you realize they didn't get twice the price. They just wouldn't even bring the water. So really, your option is water that's twice as much or no water." You know what I'm saying? And again, we're not saying that this is the mechanism to fix everything. There is a place for government, But to be honest, that's where the real conspiracy starts. You know what I'm saying? Right. That's where you need to have some sort of monopolistic power to actually be engaging in conspiracy. There not is going to be a conspiracy. So when people, and I just want to just real quick, you're not going to have a conspiracy no matter what group of people is at the top or working, what demographic is in finance, et cetera. You're just not going to have a conspiracy. It's not how finance works. It's actually the place where you're going to find the least amount of conspiring going on in terms of a negative impact for you. So just want to kind of leave that.
Right, because any kind of price fixing or that kind of a scheme is always self-defeating, because if you are out there offering the same product for the same price as the other people, I'm afraid nobody actually gets rich off of that. That's not actually how you win. And finance is extremely competitive as an industry, is I'm sure everybody is aware. So actually conspiracies and collusions are fairly rare and tend to happen in in the least understood and also sometimes the most regulated
Yep.
sectors. Foreign currency is the number one place where you get conspiracies in terms of who's got brought down for them. And well, guess what, man? That's the most intervened in market on the planet. So
that's the only markets that I ever like. I mean, I recall a couple of times exchanges stopping. That's the market I recall stopping, just dead stop, in the middle of trades. Just, oh, this market, it's not here anymore. And I'm like, well, 10 seconds ago it was. So that's totally dead on. And then, like you said, like, you know, if you look at the places where you even have like two huge, like, market leaders like soda or something, where they buy up all this small, they always are driving the price down. Because even though they're technically not supposed to be engaging in price wars, eventually marketing runs out and there's only really one way to get your consumers. And then the bottom line comes out of like human nature. You're just like, look, I dropped this 5 cents, I get a little more soda out of this guy. You know what I'm saying? And like, so it's just very hard to like, it's very hard to conspire in markets. This is not like really a rational thing. So anytime I think you see this finance sort of conspiracies or anything that's just like, you know, look at this and look at how terrible it is. You know, I always think about like, you know, try to look at it from a counterintuitive point of view, look at like from other angles, see what's really going on. The whole, I mean, all these things that we see here that are like super anti-Semitic, where they're saying like, you don't know who owns Vanguard, is just complete nonsense. I mean, it's factually incorrect. It's something that like anybody with a little bit of like financial literacy could go find out. And so, yeah, it's just nonsense.
Right. It's super frustrating. It is super frustrating. And, you know, I think my like last point, my kind of conclusion with that, and, you know, she has a section in that video where she says, okay, what do we do about this? Now, she actually makes some investment advice, and the investment advice is terrible. It's to say, don't use BlackRock or Vanguard passive index funds that are extremely cheap and achieve many goals. Go to community credit unions. Okay, well, community credit unions can only sell bank products, which actually don't serve most investors. If you are not like a retired pensioner, most of your financial needs are not served by community credit unions. I'm sorry. I have a credit union, but it is not an investment platform. And in fact, they are subject to rules that makes it so they cannot, as nonprofit banks, engage in security activity most of the time. They actually will have a whole set. You know, if you walk into, you know, in Oregon Community Credit Union, and there's a desk over to the side, some guy who does investment stuff. It's always some other name, right? It's always, you know, Global Advisors. That's because you can't operate as a credit union giving wealth management services under the nonprofit umbrella. It's not a thing that happens, and there's all kinds of reasons for that. But yeah, it's terrible advice to say, oh, have everything just kind of hang out in bank products with a credit union. Also, the guy who works at the credit union is not actually more qualified than BlackRock. I mean, that's an extremely important point, that it is very likely that BlackRock is a better steward of your average person's money than the guy who has, you know, the starter bank job. You get your foot in the door in the industry, your first gig at a bank, and your whole goal is to go work at BlackRock. You know, your whole goal, you know, if you're one of those guys, we know this. People have been around for a long time. That's a stepping stone. So no, that's not actually where you're gonna go find the best, you know, purest advice is credit unions. And so if you're out there encouraging people to disinvest from the services that serve investors the best and at the cheapest cost, I mean, you should. That's dumb. You should feel bad about it. That's terrible advice. I can't believe that it's even taken seriously by people. You know, nobody sits there and asks like, hey, why is she telling me to do this expensive thing that really helps me underperform, Mark? It doesn't make any sense to me, and that's, you know, the problem. One of the problems is at the end of the day, if you say, okay, I'm going to avoid BlackRock, I'm going to avoid Vanguard, I'm going to avoid Invesco, and I'm going to avoid Nuveen and all these companies. Well, what are you left with? Stock picking? Well,
well, I mean, like, and not only that, but you're actually avoiding owning the thing that you're concerned that everyone else owns, which the resolution to you being concerned about other people owning stuff is for you to participate in ownership. Like, right. And you're not now. And then, like, you know, the other thing I want to like say is, like, as a general piece of advice, corporations, companies, etc., they don't do things. They don't pay taxes. They don't own things. They don't control things. They're really mechanisms. They're really legal structures, or legal fictions, as people call them, right, to do things. And so I think that people should think about that, right? Like, when I hear people say, we need to tax all the corporations, well, like, really, you're just taxing all the pension funds, and you're taxing all the people who own shares for, like, retirement, et cetera. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that as a policy, but there's something wrong with it as a policy when people present it as if you're just taxing this, you know, sort of legal entity over here. You're not really taxing a person. And that's not true. All of this stuff goes back to people, regardless of what anyone tells you. And so BlackRock doesn't control anything. Vanguard doesn't control anything. And that's just, like, a ridiculous statement. So, yeah, I totally agree. I don't know if we can do much more to like expose how ridiculous that video is.
No, I think we, you know, got through a lot of it. Of, you know, it's just the same old of, like, well, let's find a new way to, you know, attack ESG investing, or without actually saying what we have a problem with it, or, you know, basically attack Jewish people, or, you know, basically it's placing the blame for all of these supposed problems in places that are the least likely to be the culprits. But they're also so sophisticated in reality that most people, in the comment section's full of them. There's tens of thousands of comments on there. They're just like, well, I had no idea, man. Like, I suspected this was the case the whole time. And there's just a lot of people being politically bamboozled as, this is the solution to your problems, buy gold. You know, she says point blank in that interest rate video, the solution is buy a bunch of gold coins. Okay, well, that's great investment advice.
But, you know, like, I would say that on YouTube, the economic videos are pretty poor. I've seen a lot of big YouTube channels that talk about economics, and thankfully there's, like, some economists out there, like young economists from different places who sort of critique them, but some of them are just terrible. And sometimes I don't even agree with the economists who are critiquing them in terms of, like, policy, but, like, just on actual economics, they're right. Just on actual economics, the video that is over here trying to push forward some policy or some ridiculous idea is just stupid. It's like the argument doesn't make sense, and that is a backup, like what they're saying. So, yeah, I mean, grain of salt with the the economic videos,
especially the conspiracy. Man, anytime you read, you know, that this one company is the problem, that should always that should strain your credulity as an investor and say, maybe, but you know, you need quite a bit of evidence, in that video it does not have that.
Agreed. We should do an interest rate. Maybe we'll do a little critique of her thing. We do have some stuff talking about. We
should do the interest rate one, because it is interesting. Banking is a lie, I think, is the name of the video, and it is a fascinating discussion because, you know, banking. It's not a surprise, given her apparent viewership, that she would be out there ranting about the banks and how it's all also a conspiracy that she claims is also a government conspiracy, which is very interesting.
It's interesting.
Because she is kind of socialist. She's like a left libertarian. And so that's interesting. You want to use the government to do what you want to do, but also it's evil too.
Yeah, a little A and B.
If a lot of the kind of left libertarian economic stuff on YouTube is very paranoid, and that's the case now with the viral videos that she does and other people do. There's a lot of paranoia in there, and if somebody is like leveraging your paranoia as a viewer, I mean, you should just always say like, just go watch, Friday the 13th, and if you really want to get spooked out, and leave it there.
Exactly. That's the best.
Don't make investment decisions based on it.
So I mean, I think we're going to try to do another podcast next week. I got a new mic, so Chaim's happy that I got a new mic because he's like, I got to edit out all your terrible digitized voice. So we're looking forward to it.
Next time we'll find more interesting stuff to talk about. And we did complain about this video quite a bit, but we do actually enjoy reading articles and watching videos you say. We won't always destroy them with facts and logic.
I had fun complaining about it, to be honest. I was like, this is so ridiculous.
Oh no, I've been wanting to complain about it for so long, months. But then I was like, oh, should I even dignify this response? And then I realized, I probably. Because also the number of part of the podcast is like, if I've had to explain something 5 or 6 times, I start to say, you know what, I can make a podcast and be like, I made a video on that.
That's right.
You can hear my whole spiel. And also you'll hear from Pablo, who brings a lot to
I got my own things to say that sometimes they need to be edited out. For the most part, I try to say something a bit too controversial. So definitely, we look forward to it. You have more ideas, feel free to send us more stuff, and we'll do more podcasts. So.
We'll see you next time. Chaim Investment Advisors Podcast.
Peace, Pablo. See you later.